Good evening, everyone. I'm going to make a start. My name's Associate Professor Paul McGinn. I'm the Director of the UWA Public Policy Institute, and it's my pleasure and honour to be here this evening to act as host. And I want to extend my thanks to Nikki Lambert for giving me this opportunity, so thank you, Nikki, for this. I want to acknowledge that we're on Whadjuk Noongar land, and I want to pay my respects to leaders past, present and emerging on the lands that we're meeting tonight to discuss a vitally important, perennial, pernicious policy issue, social issue in our society, and the research and the panel discussion that's at the centre of this evening's proceedings. I want to thank all of you for coming along this evening, and particularly Allambee for collaborating and commissioning the Public Policy Institute to do this research for them. This is the research, so I like to have a prop whenever I'm doing these kind of talks. It's my kind of comfort zone, so I have something to hold on to. So you will all be able to download a copy of this digitally. So on all of your seats you would have seen this little two-page flyer which provides a summary. The QR code will take you to a digital copy of the report. So you get first access to it basically this evening, okay? And this provides a summary of the findings of the research. So we're in for a really, thoughtful, probably emotional discussion tonight, given the nature of the topic that we're looking at. And what we do at the Public Policy Institute, or what we try to do, our mission is to engage with, a variety of policy issues. What I describe, I think, in what we're going to be looking at tonight is a contentious policy issue in terms of obviously lived experience, but also how policymakers and advocacy groups and support groups have to work in this space as well. And the research that's been done and led by my colleague Ben Perks, who's at the back of the room, and David Gilchrist, is a landmark piece of research in the sense of looking at the economic costs of the harm associated with sexual violence over the life cycle, and trying to put that into frame so that policymakers, political and bureaucratic, can understand and respond to an evidence-based approach so that we can have a more responsive, a more robust, a more equitable policy landscape in addressing sexual violence and the harms that it causes. So it's going to be a bit of a proceedings tonight in a sense that we're going to have a couple of different speakers coming up and down. So I'm just going to chair things for a little bit. We're going to have a couple of speakers, and our first speaker is Liz Storr, who is the chair of Allambee since 2021. And Liz has over 25 years' experience across Australia and globally in social impact. Her work spans resource projects within mining, oil and gas, regional development initiatives, and in the for-purpose sector, and also with government partnerships at both the state and the local level. And I want to invite Liz to give us a kind of an overview of the research from her perspective as chair of Allambee. Liz?
Thank you, Paul, for the warm welcome, and good evening, everyone. Here we are in beautiful Boorloo. I'd like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, the traditional custodians of the land, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I acknowledge and respect the deep and continuing connection to country of the Whadjuk people. It's such a privilege to gather here tonight alongside the magnificent Derbil Yerrigan. It's been a place of resources and learning for millennia, and so I think it's fitting that we're meeting here in this beautiful library, another place of knowledge and wisdom and learning. I'd also like to acknowledge the deep harm caused by sexual violence and recognise the immense strength and resilience of children, young people and adult victim survivors of sexual violence throughout this country. And I acknowledge you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for showing up, for showing your interest in this landmark research and showing us that this confronting and complex issue matters to you and it's important to all of us. 13. It's a very unlucky number. For 13 consecutive years in Australia, the reported incidence of sexual violence has increased, and we are now at a 31-year high. More than 13% of our population have experienced sexual assault since the age of 15. The national rate now stands at 147 incidents per 100,000 people. But only 13% of women reported their most recent sexual violence incident to police. The recent Australian child maltreatment study provides even more startling estimates, suggesting that around 28%, 1 in 4 Australians, experience sexual abuse before the age of 18. Demand for specialised, trauma-informed services is rising, wait times are lengthening, and the risk of system failure is looming. Chronic underfunding of sexual violence services leaves 23,000 victim survivors without timely support each year, compounding the trauma and increasing reliance on other more costly public systems. The cost of sexual violence in this country is more than $13 billion. In fact, it's $14 billion in lifetime costs across the lives of those affected. Let's just let those sobering numbers sink in. We must change this trajectory. We must find the courage and overcome the discomfort to talk about this social and economic crisis that is harming our community and can no longer be ignored. And so we've taken this really bold step. With research commissioned by Allambee and undertaken by UWA's Public Policy Institute, we can now confidently, for the very first time in Australia, quantify the lifetime price of harm caused by the ever-growing prevalence of sexual violence in this country. Calculating the economic costs and impacts may seem a dehumanising process. Statistics provide a valuable method for understanding the magnitude of sexual violence, but they do not tell the full human story. Each data point in this research represents a real person, as well as real and lasting harm. While it's a sad necessity, there is merit in capturing the full costs of sexual violence to bring attention to the human suffering at its core. At Allambee, we hold our clients at the centre and wrap supports around them. Integrity, respect and empowerment are at the heart of what we do. Our trauma specialised services here in WA are integrated and they're holistic. For 30 years we've been providing services in response to sexual violence, family and domestic violence, women's health and young people at risk, as well as community education and advocacy. Our team at Allambee has walked alongside thousands of children and adult victim survivors. We've heard their stories and shared in their healing journeys. We have a deep understanding of sexual violence in all its forms and its devastating impacts on victim survivors and their families. We know what they need to support their healing and recovery. Allambee has long advocated for much needed policy, legislative and funding reform. We've been at the forefront of these national and state conversations. There has been significant increase in public awareness of family and domestic violence and a strong commitment to reform and investment in FDV response and prevention. But this has not been the case for sexual violence. And as a result, the gap between need and response widens each year. We're increasingly concerned by the lack of understanding about sexual violence within all levels of government and in our broader society. We absolutely know we cannot be standing here in another 5 years' time saying the same thing, watching rates of sexual violence climb, knowing of the harm being done to more and more Australians every year, and still waiting for the sector development and policy change we know is needed. Specialist sexual violence services play a critical role in crisis response and healing and recovery, but also as forms of prevention. We knew that we needed evidence of the economic rationale for investment, and at Allambee we knew we must drive it. And this is why we commissioned the research, to garner attention and catalyse action by leaders and decision makers in government, in the corporate sector and in our communities. The Lifetime Price of Harm report examines the economic costs of sexual assault and abuse in Australia. It brings together evidence on the heightened risks and service needs experienced by victim survivors across education, employment, health, justice and social support systems. We really commend the UWA Public Policy Institute for producing this landmark piece of research. It's Ben. Where is he? Where's Ben?
At the back. He was at the back.
Oh, out. Great. In his absence, I would like to recognise and thank Ben Perks, Senior Policy and Engagement Officer and the lead author of this report, for his dedication to this work, his attention to detail, and the sensitivity and compassion with which he has compiled this really confronting picture. Ben, thank you. You've just missed your acknowledgement. Thanks, Ben. Again, this is the very first time that the cost of sexual violence in Australia has been calculated. $2 billion. This is what sexual violence costs Australia every year, with a further $14 billion in lifetime costs for those impacted and an additional $18 billion each year from past cases that continue to shape lives today. While much of this burden is borne by victim survivors and their families, the economic toll is also shared by governments, businesses and communities. Lost productivity, reduced earnings, increased demand for essential services all create a long-term fiscal liability that erodes public capacity over time. Each unserved victim survivor today becomes tomorrow's health, welfare and justice cost. Economists call this failure demand, the downstream spending created by neglecting to act early. It must be asked, when the scale of sexual violence is clear, why are we still not seeing the investment required to tackle an issue of such epidemic proportion? The reasons are varied and complex, but not insurmountable. The question we must be asking now is not whether we can afford to invest in specialist sexual violence services, but whether we can continue to afford the costs of neglect. The Lifetime Price of Harm report clearly demonstrates that investing in response and recovery is not an act of charity, it is sound economics. We need adequate investment in service models that reduce re-traumatisation and ensure survivors receive the full range of supports without navigating fragmented, convoluted pathways. Allambee's vision is to lead the design and delivery of a multi-agency model for crisis response. This will include access to forensic and medical examinations set within our broader specialist services. It will provide ongoing therapeutic support, healthcare, advocacy and legal assistance within a single coordinated system rather than across different providers. With adequate and sustained funding and specialised sexual violence services, we can support victim survivors to heal, recover and lead healthy, fulfilling lives. And in doing so, reduce the economic cost to Australia. Allambee's CEO and Chair of the National Association of Services Against Sexual Violence, Nikki Lambert, is a beacon of light, hope and sheer determination in this space. For those of you who know Nikki, you will know she is formidable. Her expertise and commitment to sexual violence and FDV responses in this country, in my view, are unmatched. It's a privilege and an honour to stand alongside Nikki and the remarkable team at Allambee as we champion a new trajectory for sexual violence in Australia. I want to thank everyone involved in this work, those who undertook the research, shared their stories, analysed the data, and those who continue to support victim survivors with care and empathy. To my fellow board members, I thank you for your unwavering support and dedication to this issue and for your strength, wisdom and guidance. In particular, I want to thank board member and equity advocate Craig Edmonds, who is also a long-time friend. Deep in Craig's DNA is a level of thinking and compassion that is second to none. His care for his fellow humans and work to support those who are vulnerable leaves no stone unturned. Thank you for being the dot joiner, the quiet achiever, and the co-pilot in this work with Nikki and the Allambee team. In closing, I implore you to rise to this call to action. We have known for years the human cost of sexual violence, and now we know the true financial cost. And we cannot unknow this or fail to act. Sexual violence is not only a profound human tragedy, but also a major economic issue. Addressing it requires sustained and strategic investment in specialist services, functional data systems, rigorous evaluation, and best practice service models. We need innovation, cross-sector collaboration, and real investment. We need all shoulders to the same wheel. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Important work that Allambee does and other groups here in this space. It's look. I'm stuck for words, basically. So on that, we want to cut to the chase. I will say, in terms of from a policy perspective, as Liz has highlighted, sexual violence in terms of policy making and response to it, it is on the agenda, but it's not on the agenda. And this is what this research is seeking to do. This is what this panel is seeking to do. This is what we are hoping for you to do by being here this evening as well. We are also recording this event as well, because we need to give this issue as much kind of life as possible so it can travel via various modes and channels in order to reach and inform and hopefully impact and influence different people in different locations, and particularly political decision makers and bureaucratic decision makers as well. So on that, we're going to have a panel discussion to kind of unpack not just what's in the report, but the wider policy implications and ways forward and how we can address this issue. So I'd like to invite the panel to take their seats. For your comfort and ease, they're going to sit in the order of the pictures, just so you don't get kind of, mind confused in some way. So I'm going to invite, in order as closest to me first, is Caddy Craslan. And I just had a chat with Caddy earlier on, and we've got a connection to Belfast, which made my heart sing. So, and Caddy's the Commissioner for Victims of Crime. Next we have... yeah, it should be Mac Craslan, of course, Next we have Catherine Fortis, who's CEO of Laurel House in Tasmania. Next, Professor Donna Chung from Curtin University. Alice Evans, CEO of the Centre for Women's Safety and Wellbeing. And last, by no means the least, Nikki Lambert, CEO of Allambee. So tonight's panel is going to be chaired by Carol Kaplanian, who is a new colleague of mine at UWA, so welcome to UWA, Carol. Carol is an expert in honour-based violence, family and domestic violence and human rights. She completed a PhD on honour-based violence in Jordan and holds a bachelor's and master's degree in social work and social policy. She's a recent recipient of the Grace Vaughan Award for Human Rights and a 2020 Churchill Fellowship. She has worked across government and non-government sectors in areas including sexual assault, child protection, perpetrator accountability, and trauma counselling. Her work has taken her from refugee camps to consulting for the Australian Federal Police as a subject matter expert and providing expert witness reports in cases involving honour-based violence and related crimes. Drawing on lived experience as a refugee, she brings humility and insight to her teaching and research, contributing to programs at Notre Dame University and Curtin University, and now, of course, UWA. She's currently developing Australia's first honour-based violence screening tool. Carol, I'd like you to come to the lectern and commence formal proceedings for this evening.
Thank you. Welcome everyone. What a powerhouse we have here. I feel absolutely honoured to be invited by Ben, Paul and Nikki to moderate this panel. So let's get straight into it. My first question is for you, Nikki. From your perspective, what findings or insights from the report stand out to you the most? And what instigated or inspired for you to make that decision at that very timely moment to work with the Public Policy Institute to commission the writing of this report?
So I might answer the second part of that first, actually. So I think Liz framed it up quite nicely earlier in her speech, in that we've understood the human cost for victim survivors of sexual violence for many, many years, and those of us working in the sector and lived experience advocates have really been talking loud and clearly about that for many, many years. But yet we've still really struggled to get people to really understand sexual violence and for people to talk about sexual violence, and also for sexual violence to have the profile that it needs within policy and government awareness. And we are seeing a little bit of a shift in that, but what the shifts that we are seeing, whilst they're encouraging, are nowhere of the scale that we need in order to address the issue, and also at this point in time are yet to filter down into the specialist service sector. And the specialist services are actually at the epicentre of sexual violence prevention and response. So we are the services that are walking with victim survivors from the moment they first tell their story until the moment they don't need support anymore. So we are the core of sexual violence prevention and response. Yet at this point in time, we've failed to see any kind of investment. And I also feel that there's a lack of kind of recognition of the role that the specialist services play, and there's an undervaluing of the benefit that our services provide, not only to victim survivors but to the community and to government, and there has been no investment. So we just felt that something different needed to happen in order to change the narrative around this. And we felt that it was time that we started to speak the language that government understands, which was really about talking about the economic impact, essentially. So that's what led us to this point. In terms of the key findings in the report and what out of that was surprising, I think for those of us working in the sector, unfortunately, it wasn't as surprising as you might think that it would be. Even so, the magnitude of the cost, I think, still is quite difficult to really wrap your head around. So $2 billion a year is an enormous amount. But I think more so than that, what's really stuck out is that the fact that over 60% of that cost is borne by individuals and their families, really, and community. And when you think about that, that's astounding, you know. And I, from our perspective in the sector, and I think lived experience advocates would say this as well, is they know that only too well, you know. But because those costs are borne by individuals, families, and communities, they're unrecognised. They're hidden costs, and they've gone unnoticed for decades. And so, really, I think this report is so valuable in being able to say not only is it costing the government and the nation considerable amounts of money every year, but it's costing the community. And you know, victim survivors have already experienced the worst injustice that you could ever imagine, and yet we must make them responsible for that too, for the ongoing economic burden on their lives as well. And I think it's unacceptable.
Thank you so much, Nikki, for such a well thought through answer. My next question was for Catty, but before I go there, the role of the moderator has a big responsibility to reflect and use my trauma-informed principles and be on the spot to really listen. And some of the things that you have said are incredibly poignant and important. And I think I'd like to open this question to the panel. It's a bit controversial, so you don't have to answer it, but having worked in the sexual violence, sexual assault and domestic violence sector for a very, very long time, in policy, trying to do policy reform and face-to-face client-facing with extremely vulnerable groups. As Liz said, 13% only report. And being a practitioner in that field, I've worked with a lot of refugee and migrant groups as an example. And I know that about 90% of that population group does not and will not report. Now, using those statistics on the policy scale and what the government, is the government doing enough? Are there enough sexual violence services supporting these victim survivors who are extremely brave to come forward and report their sexual assault? So, very raw and honest question. If anyone would like to if all of you would like to answer, or a particular person to answer, please do.
I could speak in the context of
voice, please.
Sure. So I'm the CEO of Laurel House. It's a sexual assault service in Tasmania. We're one of 2 specialist sexual assault services in Tassie. And I would say, in response to your question, there is enough sexual assault services for a population of 500,000 people. 2 sexual assault services is probably enough. However, we're not resourced sufficiently to do the work that we need to do across the continuum from prevention, early intervention, response and recovery work. And we're certainly not funded and resourced sufficiently to address the unique needs of particular populations that are at heightened risk of experiencing sexual violence and child sexual abuse. And I think that kind of coming back to what stood out for me in the report very much was what Nikki said around the individual costs that are borne by the victim survivors and their families. For me, I spent a lot of time reflecting then on the biases that are built into our systems and baked into our systems. And so we're not just thinking about the bias, we're not just thinking about the cost that's borne by victim survivors, but disproportionately that is borne by queer, disabled, Aboriginal, regional and remote members of our community, because those groups are disproportionately affected by violence. And those groups, for a range of reasons and others, find it much more difficult to engage with services because services aren't as accessible and available and responsive as they need to be. And that's not because we can't be, but because we're not resourced to be. And so when those groups need us to be out and about more, to be working in more integrated ways, to be engaging more in case discussions, to be working in partnership with other organisations, we need to be resourced sufficiently to allow that extra work. And for us, I don't know what it's like here, but I suspect it's the same, is that when the bureaucrats and the government, and particularly on the floor of Parliament, what they care about is widgets. How many clients have we seen and what's the wait list? And actually not the extent of the diversity of the people we're serving and the impact of the work that we're having. then we never actually get to resourcing things sufficiently such that we're getting equity in service access. And so for me, I guess kind of coming away from that, if we had the same scale of loss and suffering falling on cisgendered heterosexual white men, we'd consider it an economic emergency, we'd mobilise action, we'd do what we did when we had COVID, when it was an economic impact on men, but we ultimately have queer, black women and trans people who are bearing the ultimate cost, and we're not investing in them sufficiently and in the services that can serve them.
And I think you've pointed it extremely, I think this report truly shows the disparity in the need to take action. And we know that funding works on numbers, and numbers are extremely underreported when it comes to sexual violence. And I want to go back to that. But Catty, in your role as the Commissioner for Victims of Crime, how do these findings align with what we see in lived experience and service trajectories for victim survivors across their lifetime?
From the Office of the Commissioner, for people who don't know, the Commissioner's Office manages the government response to the National Redress Scheme. So we manage the government response to the National Redress Scheme, and I think there's the information that we are now seeing from those applications is such an important resource for how we go forward in understanding. And I thank every single person who put an application in and know that those applications cost people so much in their own trauma. In WA, we've received over 8,000 applications. Nationally, we're over 60,000. So the numbers, are just astronomical. And we still have 3 years left of this scheme. But what we know, because I've seen a huge number of those 8,000, and my team has done that as well, is everybody in those applications is telling us about their life trajectory. They're telling us what happened to their life trajectory because they were the victim of child sex assault. We see the same story. We see mental health. We see alcohol and other drugs. We see criminal activity, homelessness, relationship difficulties, and all intersecting across that person's lifespan. So what I'm saying is that the lifetime trajectory here that is outlined is replicated in that data and in those people's lives. And I don't like using the word data because it is people's lives that we're talking about. So what that tells us is, and what we know from our experiences across the Commissioner's Office and from people who've spoken to us, the victim experience does not have an end date. And often there's a view that there's an end date to it. When is it over? Our office doesn't use the word recover for a reason. We talk about people's narrative, people's life, but recovery seems to suggest you have an end date. It's like you broke your leg and they're going to fix it and you're going to walk out. It's not. So I think for me it is about, it's lifelong. No experience is the same, but in fact all experiences have a similarity here that comes out. So I think for me that really replicates what we know, and the information that we have is some of this and is to support further development of these types of reports.
Thank you, Catty. Having worked in the trauma field for an extensive period of time, there's two sides of thinking around trauma. Often people think that someone can heal from trauma, that you can just heal. And going back to what Cathy said, the victim's experience does not have an end date. Having worked with many victim survivors of sexual violence and domestic violence, I've never heard someone say to me, I have healed from this trauma. I've healed from what happened to me. Having witnessed them, I've always envisaged them as being in a cocoon and seeing their growth into that transformative growth into strength. So I'd like to pose a question to Donna here. With your role as a leading researcher in the area of domestic and sexual violence, and delving on what Nikki has said and what Catherine and Cathy has said, what are your thoughts in terms of what the research is telling us currently, Donna, in terms of where we are at in the area of research in sexual violence? Are we doing enough research that is impacting policy, that's impacting legislative reform, that's actually making a change to the victim survivors' lives and the impact of the trauma that this is having on them?
Well, that's a big question.
Well, did you expect anything less from me, Donna?
No. I just want to come back to the first point about the notion of kind of recovery, and I think for me, and this is a sort of academic-y language point, but for me often recovery is because it's drawn from a medical metaphor.
Yes.
Like, so, you know, it's drawn from like, have I healed from the broken leg, or that kind of always makes it tricky. And one of the expressions that I deliberately use is the word re-establishing. Mm-hmm. And I use that because I think it can be about your identity, it can be about how you see the world differently now, but it can also be, and I always remember these interviews where women say to me, you know, I'm going in bloody 5 minutes before the shop shuts and I'm buying a broom and a mop and all the basic things for my house again, or, you know, I'm having to get another lot of school uniforms or whatever it might be. So this kind of material re-establishment of life again as well. And I guess for me, that's why I often think about it as re-establishing yourself. But also, you know, I think I don't want to say it's the same as grief, but I think there's real parallels with grief where you're kind of travelling okay and then something will kind of throw you off. And I'm not going to say trigger because it's not a simple thing, but something's going to throw you off your beat kind of thing. And so for me, having worked in, like with, say, institutional child sexual abuse, when I've done that work, a lot of that point, if people have kind of held it, and I call it holding it, you know, held it, lived alongside it, but it's when their child reaches their age at which they were sexually abused, that's the real kind of moment of crisis for them. Or it might be that they see the perpetrator, or they see the perpetrator's family member, or someone, you know, you've left, you know, so you kind of can't predict it, is I guess what I'm saying, but it's inevitable to some extent. So I think that it's about how do we kind of support people at those crisis points too, because often, and I've seen this especially with some men who may have been kind of holding it together, you know, that very kind of masculine, I'm all right, stoic thing, kind of completely like successful jobs, all of that just kind of fall apart. And so I think, you know, we don't, that's for me why all these things around poverty and income inequality are so important to capture, because what we don't look at is how this makes people poor and underemployed as well. So, you know, we have people who might be teachers and people go, oh, well, they've got a profession. But the thing is, they're working as a relief teacher because they don't know if they're going to be okay to take the job each day.
Yeah.
So, you know, your super, your aged care options, all of your life, your social kind of things around work are all diminished. So I think anything that kind of captures that is really important. And people hold a sense of injustice and resentment about the fact that they can't do these things that they had in the plan to do.
Yeah,
you know.
absolutely.
And the being poor, constantly scraping by, and people judging you all the time. And I think that's it, is you often get these very And they might be innocuous comments, but they kind of throw you for six often.
And you know, I love the word that you use in terms of re-establishment. And the reason I brought up the word trauma is it's very difficult to measure trauma and to measure the cost of trauma and to measure the impact of trauma as each person experiences trauma in a very individual way. So when people are re-establishing themselves, or they're going from being in a cocoon to finding their wings slowly, or they're finding who they are we measuring this? This is not a question. This is something for the audience to reflect upon, to think upon, because this topic is massive, and it is also extremely evocative and thought-provoking, as well as emotionally provoking. Now, it leads us to a beautiful segue to hear the lovely voice, and I'm sure as always, the lovely words of Alison. I have a question for you. You know, going on what's already been said by our lovely panel, Alison, in your point of view as the CEO of the Centre for Women's Safety and Wellbeing, and as someone who's a real pioneer in this field, in this area, and the work that you've done for many, many years, are there dimensions of this issue that remain under-acknowledged in policy or public debate? For instance, and we've touched on it a little bit, the hidden costs, the workforce impacts, the complexity of service needs across the system, the need for more services, and what impact does this have on victim survivors? Big question, I know. Very big question. But yes, over to you, Alison.
I'll lean forward because I'm always told I don't project my voice very well.
Well done, good job.
You can bring it for the microphone.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
can you? Oh, a simple solution. I just wanted to say too that my heart is pounding because I just didn't know what question you're going to ask me. And so I'm just filled with anxiety thinking, what on earth is Carol going to ask me? And I'm also very mindful that I'm sitting underneath a ridiculous picture that I didn't choose. And so I feel really silly all round.
I will always be kind to you with all of you with the questions I ask. Yes.
And I guess just, well, really listening and having, read the report, more thoroughly this week as well, and just listening to the panellists and also the chair of Allambee as well, it's extremely serious and it's extremely heavy, and it does makes you feel deeply ashamed how we do leave the people who are experiencing the sexual violence, which you can't really imagine a more intimate kind of violation, as in you can't hide from your own body, and I think that it's that it's our deficit, it's a lack in us and not in the people who have experienced or continue to experience the sexual violence, and it is such a heavy thing, and like you say, it's ongoing, and it's quite incredible how people who have experienced the sexual violence, and often has been across their life course too, so it might have started off as a child, then they might experience it as an adult, and often when they do go on to experience it as an adult as well, if they've experienced it as a child, it's again because of our lack. So the fact that we haven't intervened when we know that if we intervene early and we build in some of those protective factors that might not be in their lives, that it can actually change that trajectory. But we don't do that, even though we know from the research that we can make a difference. And so I think when I'm reading the report and the economic costs, is that it's the cost of a lack of a system that works, the cost of the system that we haven't built properly, and you know, we all know that there's exceptional parts of that system. You know, you think of the specialist sexual assault support services who do exceptional work with such limited resources. And we know across our state, which is huge and expansive and incredibly diverse, if you think of our remote Aboriginal communities, that, you know, we've got, I think, like, what was it, Nikki, 14 FTE across the state in 12. The regions? Across the region, 12, to service all of the regional and remote areas. And, you know, to me that, I mean, I don't have to push open doors, really. You know, we know that that's shameful. It's outrageous. And who carries the cost of that in every way, and that's the people who've experienced it, and through no fault of their own, and the families, and in Aboriginal communities as well, we, you know, the communities carry that cost too, and so I think that, you know, we lack a really solid, you know, governance structure around that too, that can really hold that and build that system, so that all of the parts of the system can have a shared vision and can work together, and really lift, you know, that burden from victim survivors, and create a system where the system's doing all the work as it should do. And currently we don't have that system, and we've got a strategy on the way, so a sexual violence prevention and response strategy that came from, you know, at least 10 years of advocacy, if not longer, from our forebears, and it takes a long time to get these things happening. And so, you know, our expectation is that the strategy, that's what a strategy is. It should be strategic. It should be responsible for building that safe system, and it should be responsible for ensuring that it's coordinated and that it shares information and that it brings all those parts of the system together. And that's a very practical and real thing, and it means when there's any new and emerging issues, as we know there are, like if you think of technology facilitated sexual assault and sexual violence, then if you've got a really effective system that's working together really well and has a strong governance framework, then you can also start to have a picture of what's occurring and a shared understanding of what's occurring, and begin to know how to collectively together work to address that too. So I can't even begin to imagine what it's like to try to you know, navigate a system that isn't strong, and a system that doesn't have a strong foundation to support victim survivors.
And
yeah,
absolutely, Alison. Thank you so much for your honesty.
Sorry, did I go on too long?
No. And my role as a moderator is also timekeeper.
I was the only one that was interrupted.
No, you were not. I was just I'm being subtle. I wasn't interrupting you. I just, you know, I've got. You're saying things that are so integral, and you use the word "we" in your answer. We. And you said we lack a governance structure, and moving to the challenges and the public policy, like the policy settings around this.
And sorry,
yes.
That's just me being polite, and everybody knows I don't like to name and shame, so I say we because it's a collective responsibility, which it is.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, we know that government needs to take a leadership role in that, and government needs to understand that to have a strong and safe system, you've got to invest the resources, which are really significant.
Okay, you've made it very easy then for me to go and ask the next question, bang straight on. So I'm not sure I want to pick on anyone in particular here, but perhaps this question is for Nikki and for Catty. So reflecting on what Alison has just said, and also what all the panelists have said so bravely, we've acknowledged that there is a lack in government structure. The we is, the government. This is a very difficult space to work in. There's not many of us who actually are specialized to work in this space that really understand the victim survivor perspective and also the policy side of things, the legislative side of things. So, where are the major gaps and constraints if we are to put our policy hat on? Where are those gaps and concerns? Who would like to go first? Kathy or Nikki?
I'm happy to jump in first, and
Yes.
then Katie might want to drill down on it a bit. But I think, big picture-wise, the policy environment is complex and it's fragmented, and that's the biggest challenge. So, and that's not unique to WA, but we've got probably additional layers of challenge here as well in that environment. So, sexual violence it sits across a range of different ministerial portfolios. It sits across a range of different state government agencies. There's no overarching mechanism or structure that has complete oversight of sexual violence and carriage of that to ensure that that there's a coordinated approach to how we respond, or to whether it's response, prevention, etc. And there's also no oversight in terms of how we track on that. Government agencies, and this is not unique to WA, are often have their own initiatives and don't even speak to each other. So they operate in silos. So
Let alone non-government organisations.
And further to that, in WA even, we have our adult sexual assault services and our children's sexual assault services overseen by two different state government agencies, which is unique. There's nowhere else in the country that does that. So there's further fragmentation even within the specialist service sector itself. So that makes that makes reform challenging, and it makes coordination and a strategic approach to how we tackle these issues virtually impossible. So hence we've been calling for the development of the sexual violence prevention and response strategy for quite some time now, and I'm very pleased to say that work has come to an end, and Katie could probably talk more about that, but we're eagerly anticipating the release of that strategy, and very, very hopeful that as part of the action plan that comes out of that, key on top of the list will be an overarching mechanism, cross-government coordination, a lead minister, and really somebody to take the lead and to take carriage of sexual violence response and prevention into the future, but also who has accountability for progress against that as well. And I will say one other thing in terms of a really clear challenge that we face in this sector is a lack of understanding around what sexual violence is. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted here in this room, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But too often when we speak about sexual violence, the conversation turns immediately to family and domestic violence. Yeah. Too often when we speak to government about investment in sexual violence, they tell us what they've spent on family and domestic violence. And that's not just in WA, that's across the country. We have a national plan that has included sexual violence for the first time ever, but yet it's lip service. And it's really, they've just added sexual violence in throughout the plan wherever they've said family and domestic violence, but really there's been no action. And we've seen, the Domestic and Family and Sexual Violence Commission's report, their annual report, yearly report to Parliament has been released. And that clearly states that sexual violence must be a priority, because at a federal level, even though we've been promising to address sexual violence, we've really done very little. So, yeah.
And it's for me, having completed the Churchill Fellowship, when I came back to Australia, I was astounded. As every country I've visited I've gone to the Nordic countries, Canada, New Zealand even, they recognize sexual violence and domestic violence as equal entities, and also intersecting, but also distinct. So
Exactly, and
they
and
don't
that's what we
separate
really want to
them.
encourage actually into the future, is we understand
Yeah.
there's an intersect, that sexual violence sexual assault occurs within the context of family and domestic violence.
Yeah.
It is a form of family and domestic violence that's
Yeah.
but really we need to split those two issues out and be talking about them quite separately, because there is so much in the sexual violence field that actually has nothing to do with family and domestic
Absolutely.
violence, and conflating the two issues is really limiting the policy reform in this space, and it's limiting investment in sexual violence.
And it's also misconstruing public perception.
Absolutely.
And misleading the true understanding.
And it's also it's an injustice to victim survivors of sexual violence as well,
Yes.
to just misrecognise their experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. Kathy, would you like to follow on?
So I'm about to pull them back together again. So I think, first of all, I think it's really important that we have a sexual violence response strategy, and government is getting better. And you've got to recognising that this strategy was built by 3 agencies, which is quite unusual in that it involved health, justice and communities, because sexual violence cut it across all 3. And I've not worked on a strategy previously that's actually has been a tripartite development. So that was a really important step for government. Second one for you to recognise is I am sitting here as a government representative in a really difficult space at times. But actually coming along to this is an important part for government too, to listen, to take back, to acknowledge some of those issues. So I think that's the 2 really important things. But also I think we have to take note of where we came from in family and domestic violence, because my first job in family and domestic violence was in 1998. Some of you may not have been born. So it's a really long time that it's taken us to get to a point where the community, not government, not not-for-profits, but the community recognise family and domestic violence as a crime. Because back when I started, no one wanted to know about it. No one wanted to talk about it. And, you know, I will always admire those women who we all know who were there, you know, with placards on the side of the street, handing out cups to raise money for family violence. So I think we have to learn from family violence in sexual violence, and we have to learn from the family violence system reform plan in sexual violence, because we shouldn't get to the same point. So it's about those learnings on the key things: an integrated system, information sharing, workforce capability, that not to start from scratch. So I recognise the distinction, but I'm also saying we've got lessons we've learned from how we now approach family violence that we need to integrate into how we start to approach sexual violence. But also, importantly, for all of this, we can change policy, we can change funding, but until we change the community attitude to sexual violence, do we take away the shame in the community attitude? Because if you're a family violence survivor now, you will get support, you will get sympathy, you will be supported, and you know, it's okay, oh, this is terrible. If you're a sexual violence survivor, there is still in the community a view of, what did you do? How were you? Why you? You know, and I think that's the number one issue for us to change as a community, to be able to change every response we make to sexual violence, is we need to take away the shame and the constant putting it back onto the victim, that just hesitation in people's voices, that slight question, which has moved in family violence.
So that's the $1 million question. How do we change community attitude? And that's not targeted at you, Kathy. That's yeah.
Okay.
Please,
I just want to because I totally agree with what Kathy's saying about that constant questioning of people. around their experience. And I think that happens because we only have a criminal justice pathway. If people report to police, the police can do as supportive interviewing as they can. But then if you're told, no, your case isn't going ahead, it's not strong enough, the brutality of that is equally as harsh as I don't believe you in the first place. You know, so this huge sense of injustice that people hold. And people will know that, or some people might know that one of the other aspects and areas that I work on is around those offending in this space, both in domestic family violence and sexual violence. And one of the things I think is that they are invisible in this. So, and that's not to diminish the victim survivor, but to go, they're the source of the harm. Like, if we are not spending time going, where are you, what are you doing with your repeat offending and your changes in offending patterns, then actually we're kind of just going to keep doing this work. And we need to do this, not in any reduction, but the lack of accountability for the perpetrating of sexual violence against women and children, I think is incredible. And I think we have this attitude where if people are not found guilty in court of the offence, then they didn't do it. Whereas they were just found not guilty. We don't know whether they did it or not.
Yeah.
So I think that aspect of it really is problematic, and also the fear that if they are found guilty and they go to a sex, that they are now sex offenders and they're registered, etc., etc. So all of that is really uncomfortable for people, and they want to avoid that at all costs, etc., etc. But I think it also links to what Nikki's saying, that we don't see the whole gamut of things that are sexual violence. So, you know, passing around images of ex-girlfriends to all of your social group, putting it on websites, all of those things.
Or selling it on the
all
black
of the
market.
above. Yeah, that it's far more than just that, you know, individual act of non-consensual violence towards a woman. So, or person, I should say in that case. So I think we need to, because if you look at the economic costings, which I know are always a conservative estimate, and it's great to have them, but I think it's important to remember they're conservative. But what you sort of see is, relatively speaking, these sex offenders get off, the people that are offending get off fairly scot-free, not only in the community and legally in terms of accountability, but also in kind of everyday life sort of things. So there's a real invisibility about this that I think is absolutely problematic. And so we either have you're invisible, or she's a liar is the middle space, or the third space is he's a monster. So he's a monster, lock him up, we want to know where he lives at all times, why isn't he still in prison? So we don't have the kind of way of seeing them in the same way that we do. And like the response, dare I say it, to well, he's not Prince Andrew anymore. Oh, he is Prince, isn't he? He's not the Duke anymore. You know, where on British TV, someone said, well, essentially what we're seeing is a very privileged man being a little bit less privileged. Even though, you know, sex trafficking and all of that kind of thing. You know, so I think, you know, yeah.
Can I just add a comment to what Donna said, because I think it's really important when we distinguish between family violence and sexual violence.
The microphone.
Is, and why I say it's a community attitude, is sexual violence is tried in the superior courts. It is tried by juries. Juries are members of the community, and members of the community are continuously acquitting. So it is a community-wide issue here. Family violence is generally in the lower courts and it's with the magistrate, and it's different, but it is juries. It is the people next door to you who are going on their jury duty who are saying not guilty.
The only thing I'd say to that though is that because I actually think community attitudes, it's so critical, and it is a collective responsibility, and I think we all agree with that. Like, we all have a part to play, and I think we all genuinely believe that to be the case. And if community, as well as our service responses, it's police responses, judicial responses, education responses, if we all responded knowing that it's our responsibility to, I think we would see very different outcomes. But what I always feel it's important to say is that we also have to understand and appreciate that it's if there's a recognition and political will around investment and resourcing for, say, building a safe system, which you do have to have political will to do that, that sends a very strong message, which is also about prevention, and it sends a very strong message to the community that we value people, predominantly women and children, and we will respond, and we will work together, and we will resource it in a way that really acknowledges and demonstrates that we value. And I think that you can't, sometimes it can sound like, well, if the community attitudes change, then that's really, it can feel sometimes that it deflects responsibility away from those who hold the resources, those who hold positions of power, who can really influence and drive change. And so that's the only time I sort of feel really uncomfortable. Having said that, of course, for people who've experienced, sexual violence, to know that family, neighbours and friends are going to actually understand and not victim blame and to support, it is incredibly important. So don't get me wrong, I think it is. But I just think we don't want to, deflect attention away from, what a powerful message that sends to build a gold standard system response to people who have experienced sexual violence.
Absolutely, and I work with a professor based over East, and one of her areas of expertise is looking at the harm that pornography is doing to young boys. And the most recent research is showing us that boys as young as 7 in Australia is the first time that they are actually accessing pornography. And as they grow older, the level of pornography that they're accessing is getting more, I don't know what the word is, more severe. Correct. And I worked at the Sexual Assault Resource Centre for quite some time, as well as CPU, the Child Protection Unit. And I could see that actually translated in real life with the victim survivors that we were seeing. So my next question, as a lot of you have covered such massive areas, where is it? Yes. And I'm not sure who I want to target this question at, because I feel that all of you have something golden to say, but I can't ignore to ask this question. From what I'm hearing you all saying, there is a significant lack in education around this issue, and we can't negate that, we can't ignore it, that's the reality. There's a lot of work behind the scenes that's being done that we can actually see, but on ground, that is a different picture. So what role, in your opinion, all of you, and I'd be very interested to hear the Tasmanian perspective as well, should workforce development, training, and cross-sector partnership play in building system capacity, and also what should be done from a high levels perspective around the issue of the disconnect around sharing of data, because that leads back to the re-traumatization of the victim survivor. So who would like to be my guest?
I can start.
Maybe come a bit closer. Yes, sorry.
Again, I don't often get told I'm too quiet. I think in terms of your leading question around education, I think we've got so much, well, there's just a considerable lack of investment in education, and we're very much as a nation focused on education in schools, and with the advent of consent and respectful relationships education in schools. And I guess in Tasmania we've got some particular challenges around some of the religious schools effectively implementing that curriculum, which I don't know if that plays out over here, but that has been particularly challenging and really topical in our state, and some changes of a change of Archbishop hopefully we'll see some shifting in that. I guess our Laurel House, we have some funding that comes from DSS to La Trobe University and then to us to deliver respectful relationships education, consent education in schools, and a lot of the work we're doing when we're doing that program is talking about pornography and talking about the online environment and talking about the law and trying to help kids understand the law and how that fits in the context of what is actually moral and ethical, and what does good sex look like versus what's over the line versus what is
But Catherine, this is all funding based, so that
Absolutely.
funding could be pulled out any minute.
It's for 12 schools and will be done.
Which
and
is what's been done in Western Australia.
Absolutely.
So what, in terms of looking at longitudinal impact, what is the solution here in terms of incorporating education into the system in Western Australia and also elsewhere? Because this is a real problem that's adding to the cost of sexual violence.
Absolutely. I just might continue with a bit. I think that it is this fracturing of who's responsible.
Just being very aware of the time.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
yes.
Being the fracturing of who's responsible. So, we've got a lot of, and the Commissioner said this today in her national report, is that there's a lot of buck passing around who's responsible. Is this the federal government's responsibility? Is this the state or territory government's responsibility? These short-term funding arrangements that mean that you can do something for a little while and then you can't sustain that work, and that you can't then sustain it in a way that has whole of community impact. And so, we're focused on kids in schools, but actually those kids live in their communities. They live with their parents, and I think it's that whole work that we need to do, and a sustained effort over a long period of time, not these little piecemeal attempts at things, and that we actually need to learn from what's happening. When WA did this thing years ago, how come, we're not then having the opportunity to learn from that across the nation? When something's good somewhere, let's make sure that we're, having that consistent implementation that's still place-based. We don't want things not to be place-based, but that we're actually learning from and ensuring the system is coordinated.
Yeah, I just want to add to that as well, because I think you're absolutely right in that when we look at prevention, the conversation around prevention tends to divert back to family and domestic violence, really, and even the respectful relationships education is primarily focused around family and domestic violence, although it has started to incorporate, obviously, concepts of consent and to look at that. But there's a lot of work to be done around truly bringing the sexual violence lens into that education. But most of the prevention funding is federally funded, and it's project based. And then it's not funded anymore, and then services are left to source funding in whatever way they can, bit by bit, project by project, to try and keep those kind of educational workshops going. Now in WA, we've embedded respectful relationships education into the school curriculum. It's only been recently done, and I think there are some real concerns around how that model is supported. So how the schools are supported, how the teachers are supported, and what is the role of the specialist service in working with schools and teachers around supporting them to deliver that work, and then also supporting them in terms of any disclosures that are made that come through that work.
And the university sector too.
Exactly. So there's I think the gaps in that prevention space are just, there's more gaps than not. And what we don't have is any consistency. We don't have any consistency of funding. And I would say that, the specialist sexual violence services are really well placed to do that work, because, and in an ideal world, as part of the full suite of services that a specialist
service provides, there is a prevention arm, and that in every source of funding that we have, there's an allocation that's dedicated to prevention work. And I think if we had consistency and sustainability in our prevention funding, we'd be seeing a lot more change. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Can I just add also, like, so I totally agree, like, not enough of it, short term, all of that, so it can have low or time limited impact. I think the other thing is that there's an assumption that even though we understand that there's real problems with community attitudes, we assume with prevention that we'll just go and tell children and young people and then we're done, right? And then this next generation's going to grow and it's all going to be fine. Whereas actually what we're not dealing with is that most people don't stay with the person that they might have met when they were, whenever your relationship was, 15 or 17, that you have these multiple relationships often across the life course. So to just ignore kind of existing attitudes about consent and go, we'll do that and we'll lock it in there. Like we wouldn't, if it was something around health, we wouldn't say, right, well, we told them in grade 6, you need to get your immunisations for the flu between now and, you know, when you fall off your perch. We wouldn't go, oh, well, we told them that once. Like we, you know, we repeat that every year.
Yeah.
And for most of us, it's a way of going, oh, it's a whole year gone by, right? So
Well, we have
something
screening
Yeah,
programs, you know, like which are so well funded.
Yeah, but it's this idea that I can tell you that and you'll get it, you know, and we're done. Yeah,
Yeah.
as well as the limited. It's just only at one point. Whereas when you look at that, so sexual violence experienced by older women in care homes or in their own home because they're dependent on the care is just not even on any kind of conversation about consent.
Yeah, and you know, the knowledge we have in this room and the panel, I think we could spend the next 3 hours, and I feel we've only scratched the surface because this is such a complex issue. And we are time limited, unfortunately, because I would like to take a few questions from the audience. But it might leave the audience with some more questions and actual answers, but that shows us the complexity, the true complexity and the nature beyond the economic cost that we need to consider, and that we really need. I mean, like domestic violence, the campaign said we all have a role to play. It's no different in sexual violence. We all have a role to play, to break the stigma, to speak about it, to educate others. So we've talked a lot about a lot of things, about a lot of important things. Policy reforms, investment, what we need from the government, lack of education, trauma, the important role of specialist services and sexual violence response and prevention. But what about other stakeholders and community more broadly? That's targeted at all of you.
What I think is I think we need leadership, you know. So and that's not just with government. So I think we need leaders across society. We need leaders in government, leaders in industry, leaders in community, leaders in sporting arenas. We need leadership everywhere where people are prepared to actually have the courage to speak out and to speak out about sexual violence. The more we talk about it and the more we are able to have those open, frank and honest conversations, no matter how uncomfortable they are, that's how we're going to actually create some change as well. So, you know, absolutely government plays a critical role in that leadership, but it doesn't sit on government alone. It sits with the community as well. And I think that, you know, by being here today, everyone's already shown an interest in that. But wouldn't it be great if we were having these conversations with hundreds and hundreds of people, and then they were going away and having those conversations with everybody that they know, who then goes and have those conversations.
I'm sure
with
Paul
everyone
can
they know.
arrange that. Yeah. Would anyone else like to comment before I close with my final question?
I think it's important as a government representative that government can only do so much.
Yeah.
And that we exist in a society that to me has a whole raft of things which work against us. And I mentioned if anyone who was at the Coalition Control conference on Tuesday, I'm going back to my hatred of Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey and popular culture and media, which perpetuates a whole raft of gender inequality. I mean, government can do, education in schools and says, have a healthy relationship. And then the largest selling novel for 15-year-old girls is one where she has to die for his love.
Yeah.
So I think we need to be very conscious about that societal component and that government has only so much it can do in a world of streaming services that aren't pornography. They're just the streaming services on TV.
So Kathy,
Can I just say just quickly to that though, that, and I totally agree with you, is that I think that we're not well equipped to counter it. So if you think of the specialist sector and you think of the system where we've got some amazing parts that if joined together they'd be so much stronger, and so that system would have a lot of influence in terms of community attitudes if it works really well together, because the system is made up of all our community agencies, as in the specialist services that are place-based and in communities, that if they have more resourcing, they're able to work with local communities as well. And similarly, if you have like when you were talking about workforce development, if you have a workforce across health, police, education, who share that vision and share that understanding, that's all in our community, and then would be so much better equipped to counter those negative influences and the negative messaging in media. Not to say that it would solve it, but it would certainly better equip us to support victim survivors and for them to feel supported in a world where we do have that presence of social media.
So with the social media ban that the government is talking about for the younger generation, Snapchat, Instagram, I can't keep up, Twitter, do you think that will actually make a difference on accessing?
I think young people are pretty tech savvy, and I think they will find their ways around that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's well intended and it sends a strong message.
Yeah, I couldn't help ask the question, but lastly, acknowledging the scale of the issue, which has clearly been demonstrated, I think, today with all of your wealth and the knowledge that you individually possess and collectively, the devastating impact on victim survivors and the critical need to stop sexual violence. What is the most valuable action that those in the industry or individuals in community could take to make a difference? So if each one of you had something that you wanted someone here to take away, what would that message be? So can I start with you, Nikki, and maybe
I would say first and foremost, make it your business to get educated about sexual violence. And if you need support to do that, then you need to reach out to places like the Centre for Women's Safety and Wellbeing or Allambee or a specialist service local to you. There's not very many of them, and we can help with that. And understand how it impacts victim survivors, and know that in your community or in your workplace or in your team, there are likely to be people that are impacted by sexual violence. And so have an awareness of what that might be like for them and how that might be impacting them and what supports you might be able to put in place for them. So that's one. And then I would also say, if you're people with access to resources and have the potential to influence, then think a little bit about how you might be able to contribute some of those resources in order to make a difference. And whether that's around looking at funding some innovative projects, looking at funding, even working directly with specialist services like Allambee to actually help us to design and develop innovative models to actually to provide the kind of comprehensive and holistic integrated support that victim survivors need. We don't want to be completely reliant on government, and there is so much work to do in this space. We need other people to stand up and take some responsibility. It is everybody's business, and if everybody was able to look at the resourcing they had within their organisations and see how that could make a difference, we could actually do some really amazing work that would really, really change the conversation here.
Thank you, Nikki. So I really need to be strict on time. So if each of you can give me your words of wisdom in one sentence. That's being, putting my academic timekeeping hat. So sorry to do that. Alison.
I think just build on each other, because I think we all agree anyway. I think it's good to have a positive message, and it's highly prevalent, we all know, sexual violence, but it's also preventable, and all the evidence shows that really clearly. And so I guess the more that we all work together to prevent it, the better, the stronger the impact, and also to try not to think about it as, sometimes prevention sounds so negative, as in stop. Yeah. And I think we can all play an active role in promoting really positive, healthy sexual relationships, and talk about sexual, pleasure and sexuality and all those things in a much more positive way. I think also goes a long way. So you can't be what you don't see, and you can't have expectations around relationships unless you see, whenever you see really good positive sexual relationships, I think we all remember those, as in, not that you'd know people's into it.
You've only got a minute.
I think you get my message.
I am really sorry, but I want to give. I would love to hear you guys all night, but I would like to give our audience the opportunity to ask a few questions, maybe 2 questions. So I will get the privilege of choosing who these people are, because I'm standing here. But first, before we do so, I would like to thank our incredible panel for the insights that they've shared. So please join me in thanking them. All right, so
could I just say a special thanks to for Catherine for coming all the way over from Tasmania. Yes. And I'd also really just like to acknowledge Catty as well, because Catty being the only government rep here was not an easy gig, and I just really want to recognise the amazing work that Catty and her team have done in the sexual violence space, and the leadership role they played in really driving the sexual violence strategy, and I really thank you for that.
Christina.
I've enjoyed the discussion, I've loved it. I guess a question or a comment to add to the perspective is that when we talk about prevention and education, it's often as if we're educating individuals or communities. But I think particularly when it comes to sexual violence, we're dealing with vested interests that are incredibly powerful and incredibly organised, which are holding perpetration. And this is sort of increasingly what we're up against at an international level. At a national level, we saw that in Four Corners on Monday, and that we have to think about this as not just addressing it at an individual or service level, but we're up against very powerful invested interests with a lot of money.
Yeah.
That's my comment.
Great comment as well, and it really sort of speaks to what Donna said around the fact that perpetrators are largely invisible in this conversation.
And they're not individualised.
No.
They're supported in a system of perpetration.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Yep.
Sorry, my hearing is not the best. Was there data given of sexual abuse within and without the family? Are there statistics available in that regard?
Yeah, that I think it's a trying to get it right. It's about 90% in the family and about 10% outside of the family. But I don't have the data in front of me. But by far, the majority of child sex abuse occurs in the family. Yeah.
But our focus is on institutions because that's much more newsworthy and all
Yes.
those things. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's largely right. Roughly around 10% of child sexual abuse occurs within, outside of the family, and 90% within.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry.
So how
Sorry,
can one change
yeah.
this behaviour?
Yeah. We've run out of time. So I'm going to hand over back to Paul. And thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Carol. Look, I just kind of want to wrap up with just a few words. So I think this evening, the topic is significant, and it's been sobering to hear, about the topic from our panel of experts and the data and that's outlined in the report. But it's been, what we're trying to do here is be thoughtful and thought-provoking at the same time. So ultimately, what we want to do is kind of, I suppose, is give you some seeds of awareness, understanding, and action, and for you to spread those seeds when you leave here tonight. And we want you to spread those to individuals, within your home, within your communities, within your workplaces, and within institutions. Now, how you do that, by conversations, social media, or other channels that you're in. I think the more that we can kind of spread this knowledge and information and the positions and the ideas from the panel, hopefully that will lead to more kind of influence and impact in a positive sense spreading out. So I'd like to thank the panel for their insights, their thoughts. This is a tough space to work in, on a day-to-day basis, those who are in the advocacy and the support space. It's a tough space to talk about whenever you're confronted with questions, although Carol handled things very well, so thank you for that, Carol. And it's tough to do it in front of an audience as well, because it is a confronting issue. So thank you very much, everyone, for this evening. And go home, travel safely, and start speaking openly, caring about this issue so that we can make a change in some way. So thank you very much, everyone.